The world hangs in silence before the sea erases the civilization below. Rising water swallows the land, leaving humanity's world buried beneath the ocean. In the drowned ruins, marine life now flourishes where people once lived. Against this wasteland, a father and his son search the ruins for a way to survive. Dad leads Boda carefully through the debris, warning him about the broken glass. Boda impatiently insists that he already sees the danger. Their search finally brings them to an abandoned convenience store. Inside, the store's remaining shelves offer a rare chance to restock. Dad starts filling a cart, determined to take every supply they can use. Boda spots the canned food and eagerly shows Dad what he has found. One strange can catches Boda's attention and he asks Dad what it is. He identifies it as powdered milk, then turns the moment into another reading lesson. He firmly reminds his son that reading will matter in the future. Boda sulks, unconvinced that learning has any use in their empty world. Dad keeps collecting ordinary utensils, including a bundle of forks. Boda objects that they already have enough dishes and do not need more. Dad only smiles, certain those supplies will be needed someday. Their reluctant shopping trip continues until the cart is packed full. With enough supplies gathered, Dad reaches for the escape line. A diver shoots rapidly upward through the water. Inflated balloons lift Dad, Boda, and their haul toward the surface. As he rises, Boda looks down at the water with unease. Dad calls this sunken city the ruins, but to Boda it is a grim and frightening place. The scale of the submerged world leaves the boy quietly shaken. Below them stretches the ruined city that once bustled with life. The makeshift lift reaches open water at last. Their battered boat waits above the ruins, still carrying the family forward. From the mast, Lita spots Dad returning and calls out to him. Dad looks up and asks his daughter whether she has seen anything interesting. Lita has seen nothing. Even the birds have stopped visiting. She slides down the mast to rejoin her family on the deck. After more than a month without birds, Boda wonders if any other people survived. Lita asks whether everyone, including their mother, is living in heaven. The question leaves Lita searching Dad's face for an answer. Dad faces both children and begins answering their fears. He insists that other people must still be alive somewhere across the vast ocean. Dad promises to protect them, but makes clear that the siblings must protect each other too. The two children take in Dad's promise beside one another. On the fragile boat, the family has learned that everyone must do their part. Boda and Lita share a brief, hopeful smile. Dad watches them with quiet relief. Life continues aboard the boat as it crosses the endless sea. Dad handles hunting and the constant repairs that keep their boat afloat. Boda dries fish and searches for water, taking on his own share of survival. Lita handles the washing and cleaning around their floating home. Exploring the ruins remains Dad's most dangerous job. This year, Dad gives Boda goggles and begins taking him into the ruins. Father and son now explore the dangerous underwater ruins together. Back aboard, their recovered supplies are hauled up from the sea. Sorting through the things they find has become one of the family's small pleasures. The children inspect old finds, turning scraps from the ruins into passing entertainment. But sunset changes everything on the open water. As night approaches, the family knows vigilance is no longer optional. The warning alarms sound, marking the moment everyone must take cover. Dad urgently calls Boda to move before darkness fully arrives. When the boat jolts, Dad orders the children inside the hull. Outside, the last light dies over the exposed boat. Boda freezes after remembering the fish he left outside. Boda stares toward the rack of drying fish he left on deck. Their food remains exposed on deck, but staying alive comes first. Dad catches Boda before he can return to the drying fish. Dad shoves Boda through the hatch into the shelter below. From below deck, Dad peers fearfully through the narrow hatch opening. The boat is left exposed in the darkness above them. Time crawls by while the family waits in silence. Inside the hull, Dad keeps both children close. Lita watches the fish jar nervously as the clocks continue ticking. Dad and Boda signal for silence as Lita grips the jar tighter. Lita hugs the fish jar and looks anxiously toward Dad. A violent rumble suddenly shakes the boat. Dad shields both children in a tight embrace as the boat trembles. Boda grimaces anxiously while Dad holds him close. A glowing, spotted tentacle rises from the Black Sea beside the boat. Two glowing tentacles rise and splash beside the boat's hull. The family's fragile vessel endures the monster's brutal attack. Something slams against the boat outside, sending water spraying through the night. Boda fights panic as his father holds him close. He desperately wants the creatures to leave. Dad places a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. The boy turns toward his father. Dad assures them that everything will be all right. He pulls both children into a protective embrace. The boat groans above them as the attack continues. Dad keeps both children pressed safely against him. Boda trusts that Dad will hold them until the monsters leave. Boda nestles into his father's arms, comforted by his protection. The clocks tick on as time passes inside the shelter. The children finally fall asleep in their father's protective embrace. Boda wakes and quietly calls for Dad. He asks whether Dad's old home had many sea monsters. Dad says monsters once lived everywhere beneath the water. But in those days, people had harpoonists to fight back. Boda listens closely to the unfamiliar word. He recalls the harpoonists who fought sea monsters to protect their villages. Boda reacts with surprise to his father's story. Dad reveals he was a harpoonist and shows Boda the symbol on his shoulder. Boda points at the strange marks beneath the emblem. Dad explains that the marks are stars, not dots. He describes stars as bright lights visible at night. He remembers stars guiding people across the ocean like scattered jewels. Boda drifts back to sleep, leaving Dad with a quiet regret. Dad gazes at the stars, wishing he could show them to his children. He watches the sleeping children with quiet, lingering sadness. The moonlit night begins to break apart. The boat rests beneath a vast, star-filled sky. 3 stripped fish heads are all that remain of the family's food. Boda and Lita emerge from the hatch and stare at the ruined food. Dad surveys the wrecked deck and sighs at the damage. Dad hugs both children and reassures them that they are safe. Boda remains gloomy, unconvinced that they are lucky. He points toward the damage covering the boat. Deep, claw-like cracks scar the boat's deck. Dad admits that repairs may take a week and exhaust their spare parts. Boda offers to dive into the ruins for replacement parts. Dad recoils in alarm at the suggestion. He grips Boda's shoulders and refuses to let him enter the ruins alone. The submerged ruins remain dangerous, even in daylight. Boda insists that he wants to help and can go by himself. Dad rubs his forehead, recalling that yesterday's ruins were checked first. He grounds both children and forbids them from entering the ruins until they are 17. Boda stares back in stunned disbelief. Boda still resists Dad's restrictions. Dad says the rules exist to keep their family alive. Boda compares their life to being trapped like a goldfish. Dad promises he will take them anywhere except the ruins. That promise changes nothing for Boda. Every direction is still water around their damaged boat. Their tiny boat sits alone in an endless expanse of water. The lone goldfish drifts inside its small tank. Boda's expression hardens as he refuses to give in. Dad finally loses patience and orders him to listen. Lita excitedly interrupts the argument with something she sees offshore. She points toward a flock of seagulls flying in the distance. Dad and Boda turn toward the birds in surprise. Seagulls wheel across the bright sky. A ruined tower rises alone above the ocean. Their boat heads toward the ruined tower. The family stares at the structure in amazement. Yet the birds gather around its upper levels. More seagulls circle the crane atop the tower. Boda points ahead, convinced he can see people. The children call toward the tower, hoping someone will answer. Dad quickly covers Boda's mouth to silence him. He draws his sword before approaching the unknown building. If anything happens, Dad tells Boda to turn back and run. Boda asks if Dad expects to fight whoever is inside. Dad says it depends on whether the people inside are good or bad. With that, he leaps headfirst from the boat. He swims toward the tower through the flooded ruins. Boda follows Dad's progress toward the structure. Boda watches as his father reaches the ruined tower. He moves up the broken exterior, searching for anyone alive. The massive, decaying structure gives him no answer. Inside, Dad keeps scanning every shadow. Cracks cover the ceiling as he climbs deeper inside. He looks upward, wary of the cracked interior. He carefully tests the rotten wooden steps. A battered green door waits at the top. Dad peers through the partly open door. The discovery stops him cold. He stares ahead in shock at what he has found. Several human skeletons lie scattered across the ruined room. Outside, the children continue waiting hopefully for survivors. A nearby splash draws Boda's attention. The figure keeps thrashing in the distance. The human-shaped figure continues flailing in the waves. Boda shouts toward the tower for Dad's help. Inside, Dad rummages through debris beside a skeleton. He opens an old metal crate. 2 old explosive shells lie inside the crate. Dad examines one of the old explosive shells. A huge jagged hole has been torn through the wall. He studies the steel reinforcement exposed around the opening. The exposed steel bars are bent inward. Dad turns toward more signs of destruction. Deep gouges cover the wall around the opening. The damage reminds him of the similar marks on his own boat. Dad shivers, his face tightening with sudden tension. A faint call from outside makes him whirl around. He looks toward the boat, alarmed by the distant call. Dad swims back toward Lita at the boat's edge. Boda grabs a coil of rope, insisting that someone is in the water. Dad stares toward the water, confused by Boda's claim. Dad and Boda watch the human-shaped figure flail offshore. The figure rises, revealing a gray, human-shaped sea creature. Dad shouts that the floating shape is not a person. The strange figure plunges beneath the surface beside the boat. Only widening ripples remain where the figure vanished. Boda says it is gone, but Dad remains deeply alarmed. Long, dark shadows gather beneath the boat. Dad stares downward in terror. He grabs both children and pulls them close. Huge tentacled silhouettes move through the flooded ruins below. A colossal sea monster rises beneath the boat. The boat tilts as the monster closes in from below. The enormous sea monster erupts from the water beside the boat. Its enormous jaws clamp down on the hull as debris scatters. Dad shields both children as the deck buckles around them. The monster's enormous face looms above them, its teeth bared. Dad and Boda scream as the monster towers over the family. The sea monster rises over the wreckage, its mouth large enough to swallow the boat whole. Dad clings to Boda's hand as Lita is thrown across the tilting deck. The water suddenly churns with violent force. The monster whips its tail, driving enormous waterspouts into the air. The blast hurls Dad and Boda from the deck toward the sea. Their boat is finally torn apart by the monster's assault. Dad keeps Boda and Lita close as the wreckage carries them through the waves. Boda suddenly senses that something is coming. A giant shadow looms over the family, forcing the children against Dad. The monster raises its tail again, aiming for the survivors. Its tail slams down and obliterates the remaining half of the ship. Dad and the children are swept away with the shattered debris. Furious waves batter a ruined tower rising from the sea. At last, the water begins to settle around the scattered wreckage. The family reaches a desolate tower while the monster circles below. Only the creaking crane and crashing surf disturb the tower's silence. Inside the ruins, Dad holds both exhausted children close. Boda can only tremble against his father's shoulder. Boda notices that Lita is unresponsive and panics. He tries to wake his sister, but Lita does not respond. Dad tells Boda that Lita has only fainted from the shock. He reassures Boda that his sister will be fine. Relief vanishes when Boda turns his concern toward Dad. He discovers the steel rod impaling Dad's abdomen. The rod has pierced through Dad, and blood pours from the wound. He insists he is fine, but Boda protests that he is bleeding heavily. He orders Boda to carry Lita and get away from him. He promises to follow as he rests a hand on Boda's head. He runs with Lita on his back as he urges him onward. He watches as they move farther down the ruined passage. Alone, he grips the steel rod protruding from his abdomen. Blood pours from the wound as he grits his teeth through the pain. Bracing his back, Dad slowly pulls himself free from the steel rod. Before he can recover, the sea monster returns to the shore. Its hideous face emerges and fixes on the wounded father. Dad realizes the monster is closing in again. It lunges toward the ruins with its giant teeth bared. Sunlight burns the monster's skin, making its attack even more unnatural. Dad watches for the reason the monster suddenly hesitates. Its attention remains fixed on Dad at the water's edge. The monster studies the wound where the steel rod pierced him. Dad reaches for his sword without taking his eyes off it. He tightens his focus, ready to react to any movement. Suddenly, the monster turns away as though Dad is no longer its target. Its gaze shifts to Boda, who is struggling to carry Lita away. The monster's upper mouth curls into a murderous smile. It shoots toward the fleeing children with terrifying speed. Dad can only shout a warning to Boda. Boda turns around at his father's warning. He sees the sea monster charging straight for him and Lita. Boda races for the stairs with unconscious Lita clinging to his back. The Leviathan charges behind them, jaws wide enough to swallow both children. Its enormous mouth opens wider, lined with layer after layer of teeth. The teeth seem to continue endlessly down its throat. Saliva hangs from its fangs as the creature bears down. Boda summons his strength and leaps. He reaches the landing just as the Leviathan lunges after him. The fangs snap dangerously close as Boda clutches Lita. The creature bites through concrete and flings the siblings into the room. Still holding Lita, he freezes in terror. A tentacle slips through the gap and searches inside. The glowing tentacle heads sweep across the floor around them. Boda steadies Lita and watches the threat overhead. The tentacle pauses beside the children, far too close. He covers both mouths, trying not to make a sound. The tentacle's salivating mouth creeps closer. Its mouth twists into a sharp drilling point. The drill stabs down beside him, blasting concrete apart. Boda dodges through the strikes with Lita in his arms. He falls while narrowly avoiding another vicious hit. As the tentacle withdraws, Boda spots a gap to hide in. He slips into the gap and listens for the monster. Trembling in the dark, Boda waits for any sign it is gone. At last, he gathers the nerve to look outside. Boda steps cautiously into the ruins. Boda is stunned by what he sees. Dad stands in the fog with a sword, freed from the steel rod. Relief breaks through Boda's fear as he recognizes his father. Dad slowly turns toward Boda's voice, but his eyes turn cloudy and unnervingly cold. The figure's body begins to deform before Boda's eyes. Its face splits apart, exposing a horrific false lure. Boda can only stare at the nightmare before him. The Leviathan's tentacle coils around Boda and drags him toward its mouth. Trapped in its grip, Boda cannot react. The tentacle hauls him outside, squeezing him tight. The tentacle yanks Boda across the ruined room. It hoists him high above the ruins. Boda screams for Dad as the jaws wait below. The tentacle suspends Boda above the Leviathan's open jaws. It presses him toward the Leviathan's teeth. Boda gasps as the monster pulls him closer. Still trapped, he screams for his father. Only blood remains on the steel rod that once pinned Dad. Dad slices through the tentacle holding Boda. The severed tentacle releases Boda in a spray of blood. Dad grabs Boda and drives his sword into the Leviathan's back. Dad carries him down the Leviathan's back while dragging his sword through it. Dad lands safely with him over his shoulder. He shields him behind his tattooed arm. He places him behind himself and raises his sword. Dad warns the Leviathan not to touch his son. The Leviathan towers over Dad and Boda with its mouth open. It growls with a ferocious glare. Dad turns and orders Boda to hide behind the rocks. Left alone, he watches the monster tensely. He studies the enormous Leviathan looming before him. He steadies himself, refusing to let fear take over. From behind cover, Boda watches his father anxiously. Dad's bloodstained sword flashes through the air. Dad shoots forward before the creature can catch him. He rushes straight toward the Leviathan, with his blade ready. The Leviathan swings a clawed hand at him. Dad dodges, but the claws graze his cheek. He answers with a fast, deep slash across its arm. He shouts as he pours all his strength into the attack. He unleashes a furious series of cuts through the monster's flesh. Deep slashes tear across the Leviathan's body. Its wounded body sprays blood as the Leviathan roars in pain. Its wounded hand reaches down toward Dad. Dad lands on the Leviathan and drives forward. He races up the monster's body toward its head. Reaching the top, he leaps with his sword raised. He fixes his gaze on the top of the Leviathan's head. Dad plunges his sword forcefully into the Leviathan. Blood erupts as he drags the blade down its back. The Leviathan's blood splashes across Dad's face. He plants his foot against the monster's back and kicks away. He spins away, carving another wound as he descends. Dad lands nearby, still ready to fight. The Leviathan swings a tentacle with tremendous force. The tentacle slams into Dad with crushing force. The brutal impact leaves Dad helpless against the ruins. He coughs blood, barely able to endure the pain. Boda reaches toward Dad and calls out in panic. The wounded Leviathan keeps crawling through the shattered ruins. Dad clings to the rope and braces himself. The Leviathan opens its jaws beneath him, ready to swallow him whole. He spots the metal bar and makes his move. With one sharp cut, he frees part of the rope. He swings clear as the monster slams into the cliffside. He loops the rope around an iron bar and drops beneath it. Suspended over the ruins, he holds on for dear life. The Leviathan lunges again, refusing to let him escape. Dad turns the monster's charge into an opening. Straining with everything he has, Dad tears the iron bar free. He rams the bar straight through the Leviathan. Blood erupts across Dad's face. Boda watches from below, stunned by his father's attack. For a moment, Boda believes Dad can still win. The monster reels as blood pours from its ruined mouth. In agony, the Leviathan thrashes against the ruined wall. Dad drives the other end of the bar deep into its mouth. Standing on its teeth, he raises his sword for the finish. He hacks into the Leviathan again and again. Its eyes bulge as the repeated blows overwhelm it. Blood floods the fight as Dad screams his final challenge. But the iron bar finally starts to give way. The bar snaps in two, leaving Dad exposed. The Leviathan seizes the opening and impales Dad through the torso. He coughs up blood, barely conscious. Boda can only watch as Dad remains trapped on the monster. Terrified, Boda calls out to his father. Dad looks back at his son, overcome by emotion. Memories of protecting both children rush through Dad's mind. He remembers the fear of losing them in this unforgiving ocean. Even Boda's dives had always filled Dad with fear. All Dad ever wanted was to keep his children safe. That fear hardens into a final decision. He sees his children as they once slept safely beside him. Their shared memories make the goodbye even harder. Boda realizes something is terribly wrong. Dad meets Boda's gaze one last time. He silently tells Boda that he loves him. Accepting his fate, Dad lets the sword fall. The weapon clatters away at Boda's feet. Dad reaches for an explosive shell instead. Dad's sword slips from his hand and crashes down before Boda. With his strength fading, Dad takes an explosive shell. He gives Boda one final instruction: take care of Lita. Dad slams the explosive shell against the ground. Boda stares in horror at what his father has done. The shell explodes against the Leviathan in a massive blast. The blast wave hurls Boda across the ruined ground. The Leviathan smokes amid the waves, its head torn open. Its ruined body slowly sinks beneath the sea. Boda crawls toward the weapon Dad left behind. Dazed and bloodied, he struggles to understand what happened. He stares at the blood-stained water where the Leviathan disappeared. Grief overwhelms Boda, and tears stream down his face. Dad's broken glasses drift alone on the water. Alone amid the wreckage, Boda keeps crying for Dad. Only the isolated ruins remain beneath the open sky. We cut to a nightmare that brings Boda back to the family's familiar boat. Boda calls desperately for Dad and Lita, but hears no answer. A sobbing sound makes him turn in alarm. He finds Lita alone, quietly sobbing on the deck. Boda rushes to her, demanding to know where their father is. Without speaking, Lita points him toward the water. There, Boda sees Dad's body floating in the sea. His father's chest is torn open, turning the sight into Boda's worst fear. Boda is frozen by the horrific discovery. He tries to rush to Dad's side, screaming for him. Lita grabs him and begs him not to go. Boda fights her grip, desperate to reach his father. When Boda looks back, his sister has transformed into something monstrous. The nightmare drives Boda into a terrified scream. Thunder, rain, and violent waves consume the nightmare. Boda wakes gasping and realizes it was only a nightmare. Lita is still asleep beside him. Boda looks down and finds Lita still sleeping safely beside him. Unable to contain his grief, Boda begins to cry. He remembers the father he failed to understand. He realizes he wrongly saw Dad's protection as treating him like a child. Now Boda understands Dad protected them from both the Leviathans and the sea every day. Dad's final request returns to him: take care of Lita. Boda embraces Lita, knowing the two of them must survive alone now. By morning, the storm clears, and a piece of their boat has washed ashore. Boda sees that their salvaged boat section is still intact. Lita sits awake but withdrawn as Boda asks her to help search for useful supplies. Lita asks Boda where Dad is. The question leaves him unable to answer. He struggles with whether she can bear the truth. Lita realizes Dad is gone and wonders if he is with Mom. Her grief breaks through Boda's composure too. The siblings hold each other through the loss neither can fix. Time passes beneath a clear sky over the ruined refuge. Boda searches through everything they manage to salvage. Boda examines the ticking clocks, knowing the daylight attack has made them unreliable. Their hunger quickly becomes the next problem. He gently pats Lita's head and asks whether she is hungry. Lita insists that she is not hungry. She insists she can manage, despite the hunger. Boda searches for a way to catch food. The missing harpoon gun leaves him with only a few old forks. The forks remind Boda of Dad's habit of saving what seemed useless. Dad's lesson returns to him. What seems useless today may become essential tomorrow. That lesson now carries the weight of Dad's absence. Boda is overwhelmed by the memory, but forces himself onward. He pushes aside his grief and gets to work. Using the forks, Boda builds a makeshift spear. With his new spear ready, Boda looks down at the water and hesitates. The water that once felt familiar now looks terrifying. He fears the monster may still be alive below. Fear keeps him from taking the plunge. Lita grips his shirt and begs him not to risk the water. A passing crab offers the siblings a small stroke of luck. That night, they roast the crab over a fire. Boda gives Lita the meal, claiming he is not hungry. Her innocent smile briefly makes Boda smile too. His own stomach immediately exposes the lie. He steels himself to solve their lack of food and water. Watching water collect, Boda works through a solution. Rain can help for now, but Boda knows it will not last. He remembers Dad's lesson about turning seawater into drinking water. In the memory, Dad begins teaching him how a cut bottle can make seawater drinkable. Dad bends the cut bottle inward, showing Boda how to shape the still. Sunlight evaporates the seawater and condensation runs down into the cup. The siblings set several improvised stills beneath the hot sun. When the method works, both siblings are stunned with relief. They drink the fresh water, amazed that it is no longer salty. Together, they celebrate their first real victory. They made safe water. With fresh water secured, Boda and Lita set out to scout higher through the exposed ruins. They survey the decaying structure before climbing higher. Boda leads the ascent, but Lita cannot manage the last stretch alone. At the top, they cautiously peek through a green door. Inside, the siblings find a long-abandoned room littered with human remains. The skulls are crawling with maggots, making the discovery even worse. Both freeze in horror as Boda shields his sister. Lita clings to him, unable to hide her fear. Boda forces himself to stay calm beside the infested remains. He keeps Lita behind him and focuses on finding anything useful. Boda pulls aside a dusty cloth while Lita coughs in the cloud. A red can gives Boda hope until the smell reveals it is gasoline. The fuel is useless for drinking, and the discovery quickly disappoints him. They keep searching through the old crates despite the stench. Their next find is an old explosive shell hidden in a crate. Boda examines the shell, struck by how familiar the weapon looks. It reminds him of the explosive weapon his father used against a monster. Holding the shell, he recognizes it as the same kind of weapon his father used. He remembers his wounded father fighting fiercely to protect him. He wonders whether he can fight monsters as fearlessly as his father. He looks toward two skeletons lying together and imagines they were a family. Holding Lita close, he wonders whether he can keep her alive. Their isolated shelter offers little reassurance against the endless sea. While Lita follows the crab, Boda keeps refining his makeshift weapon. As Lita chases the crab, Boda tightens the binding on his makeshift spear. If another monster appears, Boda intends to use it to protect Lita. His father's final sacrifice hardens his resolve. While inspecting the sword, he notices a small switch in its mechanism. One flick releases a violent burst of steam from the weapon. Boda panics as the unfamiliar mechanism surges to life. The mechanism continues venting steam around his clenched hand. The sword's thrust suddenly launches him across the room. He slams face first into a stone pillar and loses his grip on the sword. The crash leaves him red-faced and bleeding from the nose. Lita returns with her crab and finds him nursing the painful impact. She leads him to a rusted hatch set into the floor. Boda prepares to investigate the dark basement despite his fear. Armed with his spear, Boda descends while Lita remains at the hatch. He steps carefully downward, tense as the darkness closes around him. He suppresses his fear and continues into the darkness. He swallows his fear and stares into the darkness. He takes another careful step into the darkness. A giant fish suddenly bursts from the water beside him. The impossible catch leaves Boda completely stunned. Below the ruins, fish fill the flooded basement. His fear gives way to joy as he dives in to hunt. Boda swims through the school, closing in on his first catch. The fish are enormous, and there are far more than he expected. For the first time in days, Boda sees a real path to food. Boda lands the strike, spearing a fish cleanly. He secures the catch, thrilled by the success. With food finally within reach, Boda swims deeper through the basement. Still smiling, he notices a strange round object reflected in his goggles. He swims toward the strange object to inspect it. The object feels organic beneath his hand. The realization sends Boda into immediate panic. All around him, countless monsters lie sealed inside enormous shells. The flooded basement is not a refuge. It is a massive monster nest. Boda floats through the vast cluster of shells, surrounded on every side. A nearby shell suddenly begins to crack open. Its sharp claws tear through the shell as the creature hatches. A hatchling claws its way out of an egg beneath the flooded ruins. Boda freezes as terror hits him. More hatchlings emerge from every side, surrounding him in their nest. He looks back, realizing too late what he has swum into. One hatchling catches Boda by the ankle before he can escape. Boda cries out underwater and accidentally releases his breath. The monster opens its jaws to bite. A spear suddenly drives straight through the hatchling's eye. The wounded creature loses its grip, giving Boda his opening. He kicks hard for the surface, leaving the injured hatchling below. Below him, the monster still struggles uselessly with the spear lodged in its eye. The hatchling glares up from the depths, still alive. Boda finally reaches the surface and scrambles onto the stairs. The hatchling follows him out of the water. Its claws lock onto the stairs as it climbs after him. Boda watches in terror as the creature climbs toward him. The monster reaches the stairs, still carrying the spear through its eye. He swings his father's sword to keep it back. It answers by lunging with its jaws wide open. Facing the creature's gaping jaws, Boda braces himself in terror. He uses the sword's force to blast himself clear of the attack. With everything left, he races for the escape hatch. The stairwell opens towards safety above. Boda reaches the top and turns back toward the opening. He drops the wooden hatch shut before the monster can emerge. His weight pins the hatch closed. Claws tear through the planks from below. The hatch bucks beneath him as the creature tries to force its way through. Boda makes his choice and raises the sword. He stabs down through the hatch with all his strength. Afterward, he can only gasp for breath. When nothing else moves below, Boda listens for any sign of life. He wonders whether the monster is finally dead. Taking no chances, he buries the hatch beneath heavy rubble. Only after sealing it in does Boda allow himself to collapse. He suddenly notices something is wrong. Boda looks around for Lita, but she is nowhere in sight. He runs through the ruins, calling for his missing sister. Boda reaches the doorway and looks outside in alarm. Lita stands alone at the water's edge, staring out to sea. Boda reaches Lita, and both stare toward the sea. Boda follows her finger to a dark figure in the mist. The motionless silhouette stands in the water with a sword-like shape at its side. Boda recognizes the terrible truth: the Leviathan survived, while human-shaped silhouette still stands motionless offshore. Lita rows hard toward the waiting lure, convinced Dad has returned. She calls out to Dad, certain he has finally come back. Boda begs her to come back. That thing is not their father. Nearby, the bundle of scavenged clocks ticks toward the hour. The ticking erupts into a chorus of ringing alarms. Boda freezes as the alarms start ringing all around them. Boda watches the sun sink toward the horizon. With every chime, daylight slips away. Boda dives into the sea to reach Lita. He drives forward through the water. The boat stays ahead as he swims with all his strength. Still swimming toward her, he looks back in alarm. A strange chorus behind him makes Boda turn. A swarm of monsters pours from the ruins and closes in. The swarm floods out of the ruins, jaws bared as it surges toward him. Boda breaks the surface, fighting for air. With the monsters closing in, he pulls Lita's boat toward the only nearby ledge. He gets Lita onto the ruined ledge first. Boda starts hauling himself up behind her. His legs kick hard beneath the water. A sudden movement behind him freezes him mid-climb. A monster lunges for Boda, but he throws himself clear of its bite. Boda reaches the ledge, but the water beside them erupts. Both children cling together, terrified and gasping for breath. A whole swarm closes around their tiny refuge. The nearby island is within reach, but the crossing is no longer safe. He knows the monsters will attack the moment they enter the water. The swarm starts battering the ledge itself. Another hit knocks the siblings off balance as their shelter breaks apart. With every impact, Boda sees their last refuge giving way. Boda imagines the swarm dragging them under and tearing them apart. The monsters close in around their crumbling refuge. Panting, Boda sees no way to save them. A memory brings Dad's vow to protect both children with his life. Bloodied but resolute, Dad entrusts Lita's care to Boda. That promise snaps him out of despair. He steadies himself, refusing to abandon his sister. His grip tightens around Dad's sword as resolve returns. Boda puts himself between Lita and the charging monster. He steels himself to protect his sister, just as Dad did. The steam-driven blade tears through the monster's head. With a shriek, the wounded beast crashes into the sea. For one stunned moment, Boda realizes he did it. But two more monsters close in around the siblings. Boda rushes forward. He carves through a charging monster, buying Lita one more chance. But the battered stone beneath them finally starts to collapse. Both siblings plunge with the rubble. In freefall, Boda pulls Lita tight against him. The monster's claw smashes the remaining foothold. With everything they have left, they leap for the boat. They crash onto the boat just as blood splashes across them. The swarm tears into one of its own fallen monsters. From the boat, Boda and Lita watch the swarm devour its own. Boda can barely process the monsters eating each other. No time to stare, Boda urges Lita onward, and she rows. Both siblings throw everything they have into the oars. The monsters recover from their feast and resume the chase. Their boat finally slams into the stone ruins. Boda pulls Lita out of the boat and toward shelter. The swarm closes in on the shore, threatening Boda and Lita's refuge. Lita warns Boda that the monsters are coming. He looks up, assessing the long wooden staircase above. He sends Lita up the stairs and stays below with his sword. To seal off their route, Boda raises his sword. His first blow bites into the stairs, but barely. The thick wood refuses to give, forcing him to strike again. Below, the monsters wriggle into the ruin. The swarm notices Boda. Boda freezes as the swarm closes in. They wriggle toward the staircase. The creatures keep advancing as he cries out. He hammers the stairs with frantic blows. Still hacking, he begs the timber to break. A monster claws its way onto the steps beneath him. With a monster on the stairs, he climbs for Lita's outstretched hand. The pursuing monster lunges across the stairs. Its claw bears down as Boda and Lita reach for each other. It rakes Boda's back, spraying blood as the stairs finally give way. The shattered staircase dumps the swarm into the pit below. Panting on the ledge, Boda and Lita look down at the monsters sprawled below. For a beat, Boda and Lita can only stare down at them. Below, the fallen creatures regroup and growl. Claws scrape uselessly across the sheer stone wall. Below them, claws keep scraping uselessly at the stone. The stranded creatures can only snarl from the pit below. Boda finally lets himself catch his breath. Lita notices the deep wound bleeding across Boda's back. Still hurt, Boda leads Lita into a nearby room for shelter. At the doorway, he suddenly goes rigid. Inside waits a colossal monster, its wounded eye still pierced by his fork. The siblings can only stare at what they have found. The giant creature pins Boda beneath its hand. Its jaws yawn open over him. Pinned beneath those teeth, Boda braces for the bite. With nowhere to move, he screams. Lita charges in and strikes the monster's other eye with the bloody brick. Still holding the bloody brick, Lita refuses to back down. Blood streams from its ruined eyes, but the creature remains standing. It answers with one brutal swing, hurling both children away. Boda is blasted aside as the bloodied creature turns its attention elsewhere. Lita is left alone against the wall, staring at the monster. Through the wounded monster's blurred sight, a terrified Lita faces it as it looms over her. It sniffs the air, locking onto her. Those teeth drift to within inches of Lita's face. She trembles, trapped between its closing jaws. With its jaws closing in, Lita cries out for Boda. Boda hammers the gasoline can, making sure the noise carries. Beside Lita, the fork-eyed monster hears the clanging. He keeps pounding the can, drawing its attention away from her. The monster turns on Boda and charges with its jaws wide open. With no room to hesitate, Boda winds up the can. His gasoline can enters the monster's open mouth, beginning to spill fuel. With the gasoline can already in its mouth, Boda slides past the charging monster. With the gasoline can still in its mouth, the monster crashes through the stone wall. The impact hurls Boda across the ruin. He forces himself back to his feet. Fuel spills inside the monster's open mouth. Boda glares ahead, his battered face set with determination. With everything left, he swings the sword. Its edge scrapes stone, spraying sparks. The sparks race toward the fuel-soaked monster. The gasoline ignites, and fire erupts around it. The monster writhes as the gasoline fire consumes it. Boda snatches Lita and pulls her away from the blaze. Boda guides Lita toward the ladder. Behind them, the burning beast keeps thrashing. Beside the fire, a case bursts open, releasing explosive shells. From the ladder, Boda sees the loose shells rolling toward the flames. His face goes pale as he realizes one is about to explode. Boda urgently tells Lita to get down. Boda yanks Lita close, shielding her from the blast. The shell erupts, swallowing the giant monster in flame. The blast tears through the ruin, pulverizing everything in its path. The shockwave hurls Boda and Lita clear as the structure gives way. Falling rubble crushes the remaining sea monsters beneath the waves. Still holding Lita, Boda is hurled through the air. Behind them, their shattered refuge crashes into the sea. The children plunge underwater amid the collapsing wreckage. As the ruin caves in, falling debris pummels the monster eggs below. The collapse crushes the remaining monster eggs beneath rubble, blood spreading through the water. Boda keeps Lita close as they fall through debris and blood. They burst to the surface, gasping for air. Gasping, the siblings haul themselves onto a slab of stone. Boda's breath catches as he takes in the devastation around them. Only a wrecked stump of their refuge remains above the waves. Behind Boda, a claw silently hooks over the ledge. Boda freezes, drenched in sweat as fear grips him. Several monsters surround Boda and Lita amid the wreckage. The creatures close in around him and Lita. He holds Lita close as danger reaches them. A creature snarls, drool hanging from its bared teeth. Its jaws open wide. Boda swings his sword at the advancing monsters, keeping Lita behind him. Boda strikes, but a monster clamps its teeth around his sword. The monster grinds down on Boda's sword. More creatures crowd in, pinning him beneath their jaws. With Lita pressed against him, Boda desperately holds the line. Terror finally breaks through as he begs not to die. Before it can finish them, something tears into the monster from behind. Both siblings freeze, staring toward their unseen rescuer. Out on the water, an armed figure approaches. A white-haired woman arrives, armed heavily and utterly unreadable. The white-haired woman's blank stare gives nothing away. Boda can barely process it. Their rescuer is a person. A white-haired stranger stands armed with twin massive blades. An eye patch hides one eye. Her stare never wavers. Boda shields Lita as both stare in shock. Around their boat, the monsters crowd in. The stranger arms a heavy harpoon gun. A chorus of growls erupts. They burst through the waves toward the children. Unfazed, she squeezes the trigger. Boda shields Lita as they react in alarm. Her weapon roars without hesitation. Harpoons rip through the charging pack. Smoke rolls over her as she keeps firing. But the shots slice dangerously close to the children. He ducks over Lita as harpoons hammer the boat. He recoils at the harpoons, shielding Lita with his body. The white-haired stranger never loses her composure. Harpoons keep tearing through the charging pack. Unfazed, the white-haired stranger keeps firing into the swarm. From the boat, Boda watches her hold the monsters back. A sea monster's clawed footsteps onto the boat as danger closes in behind Boda and Lita. A monster lunges at the children, and Boda keeps Lita behind him. The attack sends both children flying. Refusing to fold, Boda snatches up a heavy wrench. Boda struggles against the monster at point-blank range. The creature seizes Boda before he can force it back. Its massive claw bears down on him as he braces for the blow. He cries out as the attack leaves him helpless. Harpoon fire tears into the monster before it can finish him. The monsters crash down, their bodies bristling with harpoons. For a moment, Boda can only stare. Nearby, the white-haired woman stands calmly over the carnage. She calmly readies her harpoon gun for whatever comes next. She reloads her harpoon gun. Boda suddenly cries out in alarm. A ferocious sea monster erupts behind her. The monster's blow clangs against her harpoon gun. The blow sends her harpoon gun spinning away. Her weapon disappears beneath the waves. With her harpoon gun gone, she braces as the monster closes in. Her arm is already torn open and bleeding, but she remains composed. Blood runs from the slash across her arm. The wound barely shakes her resolve. Her harpoon gun sinks between the circling monsters. With her weapon lost, the swarm surges toward her board. She draws the twin swords from her back. Boda and Lita can only stare. One foot plants firmly on the board. Blades drawn, she rockets toward the monsters. She charges straight into the swarm, blades poised between snapping jaws. One blade bites into a monster's head, spraying blood across her. The strike tears through, carving deep into the creature. Without slowing, she drives her sword through another attacker. Another set of jaws closes in. She only smiles. She whips into a rapid spin. Her board carves a violent spiral through the water. Riding the wake, she faces the remaining monsters head-on. A sea monster fixes its terrified stare on her. Her blades tear the attacker apart. Blood erupts across the water as she rides through the kill. Still moving, she keeps her fearless gaze on the surviving monsters. The white-haired swordswoman carves into the charging monster without breaking her focus. Her spinning blade barrage tears through another monster, spraying the water red. Boda can only stare, stunned by the massacre unfolding before him. The swordswoman keeps her momentum, whirling through the swarm. Expressionless, she crosses both blades above her head as the monsters close in. One creature meets the blades head-on and is carved open. She pivots through the spray, leaving no opening for the monsters. Her blades keep slicing through the pack as blood floods the water. The white-haired fighter skims past the wreckage, keeping her blades moving. Monster remains reined back into the surf. Blood spattered, she doesn't even blink. What survives can only stare from the bloodied water. Her gloved hand closes around the sword at her hip. A blade flashes across a monster at close range. One creature freezes as steel slams in, spraying blood. Over their boat's battered side, Boda and Lita watch the slaughter in stunned silence. Boda and Lita can only stare as monster blood splashes across them. Still shielding his sister, Boda turns toward another splash behind the wall. Their boat is boxed in by floating monster corpses and bloodied water. A survivor suddenly rises beside them, bearing jagged teeth. The white-haired woman plants her foot and launches from her board. With both swords drawn, she flips through the air toward the attacker. She drops fast, blades leading the strike. Her blow lands, spraying fresh blood across her face. Boda and Lita can only stare. The white-haired woman stands over the slaughtered swarm. She turns a cool glance on the children. Around them, monster corpses choke the bloodied water. She wipes the blood from her face. Her sword slides back into its sheath. With her weapon put away, she faces Boda and Lita. Her stare makes Boda clutch Lita tighter. Boda clutches Lita, still unsure whether their bloodied rescuer is friend or threat. He recalls their bloodied rescuer cutting down a monster as she rides past on her board. Her calm aim offers him no reassurance. Those shots could have struck both children. The danger stays lodged in Boda's mind. Her silent close-up leaves Boda unable to decide whether she is friend or enemy. She says they were incredibly lucky to meet a skilled harpoonist out here. The word harpoonist catches Boda's attention. Boda remembers Dad telling him that their people once had harpoonists too. The old memory draws his full attention. In Dad's lesson, harpoonists fight sea monsters to defend their village. Boda finally understands what a harpoonist is. That makes the white-haired woman one of those monster hunters. At last, she introduces herself as Kana, from Union Busan. Boda presses Kana about the Bususan Federation. Kana's gaze fixes on something beyond them. Out on the water, a deep rumble begins. A colossal shadow rises from the sea. The children can only stare as its shape emerges. What approaches is no ordinary ship, but a floating city packed with infrastructure. Its scale leaves Boda and Lita speechless. To Boda, the ship looks more like a moving island. The giant vessel keeps bearing down on their tiny position. The name on its hull confirms it, Union Busan. Every level is built like a city stacked onto a ship. Spray splashes across Boda and Lita, yet neither can look away. Boda is overwhelmed by the impossible structure before him. Even its outer decks stretch far beyond anything the children know. He cannot take his eyes off it. The ship looms over the wreckage left by the battle. Bubbles suddenly boil up beside their raft, and a submarine surfaces directly in front of them. The sudden arrival makes both children jump. Kana remains perfectly composed. Its hatch swings open. Brune climbs out to meet Kana. She makes it clear that his arrival was late. Brune fires back that Kana is simply too fast. His attention shifts to the two unexpected survivors. Boda watches the armed stranger step fully onto the deck. More crew members gather around the submarine. The sight of other people finally breaks through Boda's shock. Figures begin appearing along Union Busan's rails. Soon, the decks are crowded with human faces. The siblings stand frozen beneath all those watching eyes. Boda shows Lita the people gathered above them. Kana stands apart, her sword still strapped across her back. Brune and the crew take in the children below. All around them, strangers keep watching. Families pack the stacked balconies, from small children to the elderly. From below, Boda calls Lita's attention to the countless people above them. Tears well in his eyes as he looks up at the crowd. Through her own tears, Lita asks if this means they are safe. Her brother answers by grabbing Lita and pulling her into a tight embrace. In his heart, Boda calls out to his father. Clinging to his sister, he sobs that they have finally found other people. After everything they have endured, Boda knows they have been saved. Above them, Union Busan's searchlight powers on. Its beam reveals the dead monsters scattered across the water. Not one of the creatures is left alive to move. Another beam cuts through the darkness. This one lands directly on the rescued siblings. Boda and Lita can only stare. Around them, the team spreads out and floods the wreckage with light. Kana orders a complete search. Nothing gets away. She calls the divers for their report. Below the surface, Dr. Foyd confirms there are no monsters left alive. Only severed pieces remain in the ruins. For Foyd, that is a wasted specimen. He blames Kana for leaving him nothing to study. Brune knows better. Kana never leaves a sea monster behind. The wreckage itself raises another question. The collapse has crushed the nest buried below. She pauses over the question. Brune has never seen a sea monster this grotesque. A diver calls Dr. Foyd over to inspect it. Foyd identifies the corpse as a kentrasi. Its scale is beyond anything the stories promised. The monster stretches more than 50 meters. It is one of the 7 devils of the sea, and this one is far larger than the rumors. Brune stammers at the name while Kana looks on. Dr. Foyd asks whether Kana killed the kentrasi alone. She pauses before answering him. She answers that she did not kill it. Dr. Foyd asks who could have killed the kentrasi. Kana spots a broken steam weapon lodged in the corpse. Blood coats the broken weapon and the flesh around it. For a moment, she studies the evidence in front of her. Her attention shifts to the 2 children aboard the transport. Having survived the disaster, the siblings finally smile. A Union Busan official begins registering the 2 refugees. He asks how long they have been adrift. Boda says it has been about 10 years. The answer stops the official cold. The official taps Boda with his clipboard, mocking his answer. Lita immediately steps in for her brother. She insists they are not lying. The official snaps back, offended by a child's challenge. Lita calmly calls him a low-level public servant. His face hardens as he drives the pen back into the form. Boda finally explains that their father had been with them. Boda lowers his tearful face. Their father is no longer with them. Through tears, Boda explains that a sea monster killed their father. Kiho confirms that only Boda and Lita remain. He introduces himself as Kiho Lee from the refugee center. Lita's answer to his invitation for questions is pure disgust. Boda points out the armed strangers and asks who they are. The answer stuns him. They are harpoonists. Boda stares at the fighters, awed by the people protecting humanity from sea monsters. Boda recognizes the tattoo as the harpooner team's symbol, and his father's stories suddenly feel real. The truth hits Boda hard. His father's stories were never fairy tales. Kana bears that same harpoonist mark on her shoulder. Kana's shoulder tattoo fills the frame, its circular design marked by 3 visible stars. He explains that Kana is no ordinary fighter, but someone special. Kana charges through sea monsters as Kiho identifies her as a 3-star harpoonist. Kiho emphasizes Kana's 3 stars, and Boda asks what they mean. He explains that harpoonists mark their sea monster kills on their bodies. Each star on a harpoonist's tattoo represents 100 sea monster kills. Kiho drives home the scale. 3 stars mean Kana has killed at least 300 sea monsters. Boda immediately asks whether 6 stars would mean 600 kills. Kiho only laughs. That number is impossible. Kiho calls any 6-star harpoonist a legend, leaving Boda wide-eyed in stunned silence. Boda freezes, wide-eyed, as his thoughts turn to his father. Boda realizes his father clearly carried 6 stars. The harpooner team closes in on their boards. With permission granted, they prepare to move over to the ships. Kana looks back at the stunned siblings. Without a word, she turns away. Her board rockets off in a burst of spray. Boda lunges after her, calling out. She answers him without slowing down. Brune recalls Skutum, the ultra-crab no harpooner could kill. Kana cuts in. Skutum was never killed. Brune can only stare, thrown by her correction. Instead, the giant crab devours its attackers one by one until its hunger is satisfied. Brune dismisses Kana's account as another refugee fairy tale. Kana holds her ground. It is not a fairy tale. Kana's mother reaches for her as the monster attack closes in. All around young Kana, the monster crushes screaming passengers. The massive creature keeps feeding, towering over the helpless child. Its claws tear through the crowd, leaving no escape. Kana hides beside the cargo, trapped beneath the sound of bodies breaking. Overwhelmed by the slaughter, she can only cry. Back in the present, Kana's stare turns cold. She witnessed the massacre herself. To sea monsters, Kana says humans are nothing but food. Brune absorbs Kana's account in grim silence. At last, Brune understands why he despises sea monsters. Their little boat chugs alongside Union Busan's towering hull. Ahead, the ship's lowered ramp opens a way aboard. Kiho tells the children they have arrived. Boda and Lita can only stare at what waits beyond the boat. Kiho points out the enormous vessel's main entrance. Guided by Kiho, the siblings pull up to Union Busan's entrance. Their boat reaches Union Busan's lowered entrance ramp. Kiho urges the siblings to watch their step. A man hands Boda the belongings recovered from their boat. As they disembark, Kiho offers them temporary shelter inside Union Busan. Boda can barely believe they might be allowed to stay. Kiho makes the terms clear. Trouble during their trial means immediate expulsion. The warning cannot contain their relief. Kiho abruptly pauses, a worried realization crossing his face. Kiho points out that walking barefoot here is dangerous. Checking the time, Kiho realizes his shift is nearly over. Still, he leads the siblings toward the market for shoes. They enter Union Busan's enormous industrial interior. Boda can barely take in the scale around them. Lita marvels that the giant ship does not shake at all. A crane hauls away a mangled bundle of scrap. Boda watches the operation, stunned. The crane drops another load of wreckage onto the scrap heap. The crane works beside a waiting truck, keeping the scrapyard salvage operation moving. Workers keep the salvage operation moving beneath the ship's cavernous interior. Others sift through the pile, hunting for anything still useful. Surrounded by the work, Boda catches the sharp smell of metal. Kiho Lee leads the children upstairs and warns them to stay close. Barefoot, the siblings follow him deeper into Union Busan. A worker inspects enormous machines, their cables and motors humming without pause. A hulking machine clanks through its work as they pass. At a creaking doorway, Boda's attention snaps ahead. He freezes, stunned by what lies beyond. Inside, Union Busan opens into a packed market spread across several levels. For the siblings, the sheer number of people is almost impossible to take in. Fishmongers work their ice-covered displays while an old violinist plays beside the passing children. Grilled skewers stop both children in their tracks. Kiho Lee turns back, impatient with their distraction. Kiho Lee brings the children to a shoe stall. The shopkeeper quotes 30 nuts for 2 pairs. The price makes Kiho Lee recoil. Boda searches his box for something worth trading. He finds an answer. He offers an alarm clock instead. The shopkeeper points out that clocks are already on clearance. Boda pulls out a bottle marked whiskey. Boda produces the whiskey bottle, unsure why it matters. The shopkeeper's sudden interest tells Boda the bottle has value. Kiho intervenes, outraged by the offer of 2 pairs of shoes. Instead of arguing, Kiho calls the whole market over. Kiho's shout draws the surrounding market crowd toward Boda and the whiskey. Market goers immediately crowd Boda for a closer look at the bottle. Crowding around Boda, buyers open the bidding on his genuine liquor with offers of 300, 500, and 900. Another offer reaches 1,000, leaving Boda stunned as he clutches the bottle. The bids keep climbing, echoing through the market. By the time the sale ends, Boda and Lita are wearing new boots. They leave burdened with food and supplies from a single bottle. Lita marvels at their haul while Boda carries the rest. Lita clutches her food haul, wishing they had not poured their other liquor into the sea. Boda reminds her they had needed rainwater more than liquor. Kiho tells them an object's value changes with the situation. His real lesson is simpler. In Union Busan, money is what they can trust. Kiho leads Boda and Lita to the place where they will be staying.